Texturen kann man überhaupt nicht richtig erkennen.
Can you break VR by maxing everything out? This video honestly reminded me of school. Back then in chemistry class, me and my friends always wanted to know what happens if you push an experiment too far. Does it still work or does it blow up in your face? And to be honest, this was a lot of fun. I had the exact same feeling here. And an experiment like this works especially well with the Pimax Crystal Super, because in Pimax Play you can tweak a ton of settings. To be fair, this isn't unique to the Crystal Super. Other Pimax headsets offer a lot of control too. One important thing though, you don't need to tweak anything. The headset works really well on default settings, but if you want to, you can deviate massively from the recommended values. And that's exactly what I did. I wanted to know, does VR still work if I push everything as far as it can go? This isn't meant to be super serious, it's just a curiosity experiment. So don't try this at home and enjoy. I started with the more harmless stuff first. Settings where I didn't expect anything truly terrible. So in this chapter, it's all about extreme brightness and contrast settings and then color tuning. These changes can make the image look very different, but there are mostly cosmetic changes. Let's take a look. Let's take a look at what happens when everything is set to the absolute maximum. Brightness all the way up, contrast all the way up. Yeah, this is way too bright. The contrast completely collapses. Colors no longer look natural at all. Everything is blown out. This is clearly not something you would ever want to play with. Honestly, the default middle ground actually works very well here. Now, let's do the opposite and remove contrast and brightness completely. Everything is set close to zero. You can still see something, but the image becomes extremely dark. Transitions between surfaces almost disappear. Shadows and blacks all blend into one. Colors still look kind of interesting, they even pop a bit, but overall it's far too dark to be usable in any real scenario. Now, let's play with the individual color channels. And wow, everything turns red. I honestly can't really say much more than that. Everything is red. You can still see other colors underneath, but the red overlay completely dominates the image. It's extreme and clearly not useful for normal gameplay. Overall, that wasn't too wild. Yes, the image can look very wrong, brightness, contrast and colors can be completely off, but the 3D effect was still there. And it wasn't particularly exhausting for me. Honestly, this is pretty much what I expected. So, in the next chapter we are going one step further, away from purely visual taste changes and towards settings that actually affect how the image is computed. Now it's getting more serious. I'm going to set the render resolution extremely low, basically as low as it can go. And obviously, I expect the image inside the headset to look terrible. But then I'll try to fix it artificially using upscaling. Specifically, I'm using NIS. NVIDIA Image Scaling. That's a driver-level upscaling method where a low-resolution image gets scaled up. And because NIS also includes sharpening, of course, I'm pushing sharpening to the maximum too. So, low resolution, aggressive upscaling, and max sharpening. Let's see what comes out of that. And for this experiment, Kayak Mirage is perfect. It's known for very clean, beautiful graphics, so it's a great candidate to see if these settings can completely ruin the experience. This already looks pretty extreme. I can barely read any text anymore.
Ich kann hier noch nicht mal die Schrift lesen. Das ist
yes, it's bright, but that doesn't make it look good. The water almost looks like an abstract painting.
Kann jetzt nicht wirklich sagen, dass das schön aussieht hier. Das sieht ein bisschen
everything
aus wie so
blends into everything else.
wie so eine Aquarellmalerei oder so eine
Textures are basically gone.
Malerei, wo alles so fließend
They are completely flattened.
Echt interessant.
I've honestly never seen a VR game look like this before.
Auf jeden Fall habe ich noch nie ein VR-Spiel so vorher gesehen.
What became very obvious here, also because you can clearly see it in the recording, is that the image was already heavily altered on the software level. That's why it shows up so clearly in OBS. The image is basically broken before it even reaches the headset. The through-the-lens footage helps as well because it shows how much worse it looks when it's directly on your eyes. And honestly, it was pretty terrible. In some cases, the game was almost unplayable because even menus became hard to read. Text was barely legible, symbols weren't clear anymore. And interestingly, it sometimes looked slightly better on the monitor than it did through the headset, especially small text. A fascinating test, but definitely not something you would ever want in real life. From here on, it's not just visually ugly, it becomes genuinely problematic. Because now we are not only degrading image quality, we are messing with the system itself. From this point on, we are changing things in two ways at the same time. Mechanically, by physically shifting the lens positions through IPD, and digitally by manipulating offsets in software. So, mechanical changes and software corrections start interacting, and that's the moment where a purely cosmetic problem turns into something that can be seriously uncomfortable for your brain. So, here's what I'm doing. I'm setting the IPD to the maximum possible value, and at the same time, I'm pushing offset to extreme values. At this point, it almost doesn't matter which game you choose. The effect doesn't come from the game. It comes from how the image arrives at your eyes. I picked Half-Life Alyx as a clean, well-known reference to test this. Oh man, this is actually such a beautiful game. Destroying it like this almost feels wrong. I have absolutely no depth perception left. Everything is completely misaligned. Left and right eye no longer match at all.
So, es ist super eng beieinander.
The offset is completely wrong. The IPD is way off.
66.
I can barely orient myself.
Oh Gott, ey. Das ist heftig. Ich gehe mal einmal ins Spiel rein.
At times it feels like I'm only seeing the image with one eye. The other one becomes almost unusable.
Also eigentlich macht das fast gar keinen Sinn.
The whole image is heavily distorted.
Boah, das ist aber auch so wie so ein Fischaugeneffekt. Also
when I move my head, everything bends and warps.
Bewege, dann das könnt ihr wahrscheinlich nicht sehen. Ich muss das gleich
I can still kind of move around, but this is absolutely not playable. This is no longer VR.
Erahnen, wo ich hingehe.
In Half-Life Alyx, the result was not pretty. The image was sharp again, yes, but I noticed very strong chromatic aberration and heavy distortion. Most importantly, the left and right eye didn't match anymore. I basically lost depth perception. To even operate the game, I had to focus on one eye's image and actively ignore the other. It was an interesting experience, but this is not how you want to play VR. And now we are taking it one step further. Next, I'm not only ruining IPD and offsets, I'm also destroying image quality again on top of that. So, we combine everything: extremely low render resolution, aggressive upscaling, max sharpening, plus wrong IPD and offset. And for this kind of overkill, there is hardly a better game than Beat Saber, because Beat Saber depends heavily on depth perception. If depth collapses, you'll notice immediately. I really have to say this clearly. This is no longer a VR experience. It still barely works. It feels like a flat display right in front of your eyes. There is no depth perception left at all, but there is absolutely no fun in playing like this. As you can see, it was actually difficult to even record this properly, because with wrong IPD and offset plus broken image quality, the recording often captures basically one eye, and that's technically expected. So even watching the footage back doesn't fully show how confusing it feels inside the headset. At one point I tried switching which eye I used for orientation, and it didn't work at all. It almost felt like the fields were swapped, like my right eye was seeing the left view and vice versa. Completely wrong. What surprised me is that I still made it through part of the level, but there was no depth perception left. It felt like flat gaming on one eye. One last part, more like a bonus. I want to see whether you can mess with inside-out tracking using extreme lighting conditions. I keep reading that some people run into issues with bright light, so I tested it with my studio lights, strong direct light from the front and side. Now let's quickly test the tracking under extreme lighting conditions. Same weapon, strong direct light.
Hier funktioniert.
And honestly, it still works.
Geht eigentlich.
I expected this to be worse.
Es geht eigentlich. Mal voll gegens Licht.
As far as tracking goes, it actually holds up better than expected.
Habe ich mir schlimmer vorgestellt.
The inside-out tracking on the Crystal Super isn't perfect, but I also wouldn't call it bad. In shooters you can sometimes see a bit of micro jitter while aiming. That's just part of how inside-out tracking behaves with the Crystal Super. The good news, tracking has improved noticeably over time through updates, and even under very harsh studio lighting, I couldn't find a clear, consistent degradation. So, in short, not perfect but solid, and extreme lighting didn't really make it worse. Overall, I honestly had a lot of fun with this video. It's very different from what I usually test in a headset. And it was genuinely interesting to see what happens when you push extreme values in Pimax Play. So extreme that at some point VR isn't really a VR experience anymore. That's when it stops being ugly and starts becoming genuinely exhausting. The image can still look sharp, but the spatial information no longer matches. Left and right eye don't deliver compatible signals, and your brain can't build a stable 3D space anymore. Instead, you get heavy distortion, you lose orientation, and even controller interaction starts to feel wrong. One key takeaway for me is there are very different levels of messing things up. Brightness, contrast, and colors can absolutely ruin the look, but it's mostly cosmetic. IPD and offset are a completely different category. Those are settings you should be careful with. For IPD, it's simple. Stick to what matches your anatomy and feels relaxed. And for offset, small, careful adjustments can make sense, but extreme values don't, at least in my opinion. And honestly, I sometimes wonder why some of these extreme ranges are even possible, because I don't see a practical reason to push them that far. But without those ranges, we also couldn't do a crazy experiment like this. If you enjoyed this one, feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Tschüss.